Welcome to the bright side of longevity. Join Dr. Roger Landry and guests as they discuss the bright side of getting older through healthy longevity. Guided by research, this lighthearted and educational discussion will leave you with practical tips and ways to impact your lifestyle to brighten life's journey.
Well, welcome everybody. Hello, Danielle. I'm so happy you're here with me.
Hey, Dr. Roger. Good to see you.
It is good to see you. We live, folks, you probably know by now, but we live about, 1,000 miles apart. I'm a little further. I'm out in the West for this recording, so we're even further. So it is so nice to connect like this and share our experiences, and we hope that you enjoy these because we enjoy making them. So there you go. This one's about building better relationships.
Can all use that.
Well, how did we get here? Let me recap real quickly. So around Valentine's Day, we were thinking about, the whole idea of, close relationships and love. And we had a 2-part series, Love, Not at All What You Think It Is. That was a provocative title. That was a good one.
Yes.
And we had 2 parts. And the first part, we really talked about the relationship of fear, love, and connection. And if you didn't hear it, I highly recommend you do, although you don't need that to appreciate this one. And the second one was really drilling down a little bit about what love really was. And we had the help of some specialists in this area, and basically it boiled down to having someone have your back. That's really what love is about. And that led to, if we're going to be talking about this and connecting to others, we should talk about interpersonal skills. And we do that because, as you've heard us so many times, right, Danielle, we talk about how important social connection is to our health, our longevity, our quality of life, because we're social creatures. We're born that way. And, we don't do well in isolation. We get sicker. We get more heart disease, more cancer, more dementia. And we just tend to be unhappy people. So we're better together. So if we're going to be together, we ought to know how to communicate, right?
Exactly. We might be hardwired for social connection, but interpersonal skills we definitely need to learn.
Yeah, you're going to need that person, but you keep driving them away and you don't understand why, So that's what we want to talk about, because we all fall into some traps and habitual ways of interacting, or we don't pay attention. So this is a good one, and preparing for it with you, Danielle, I have to say, and I learned some things, so it's never too late, right? to learn new things. So Paula will be happy with some of these. Paula is my wife of many decades, and so she's going to appreciate what I learned from this. So
yeah, I'll send her my coaching bill after the show.
That's right. You should. She'll be sending you thanks. So let's first of all, why should there be problems with interpersonal communication? That's sort of an abstract question, but I think as we thought about it, I think we always talk about the hunter-gatherer times, and we live in tribes, and that was the way we lived for most of the time. And now we're in our very fast-paced, high-tech, production-oriented, time-oriented society. So the pace of life sort of doesn't allow for just taking the time to really attempt to communicate. It isn't just functional the way it is today. You have to communicate to buy a loaf of bread, or to tell your wife where you're going, or whatever. But real communication takes patience and time, and sort of take a time out, so to speak, right, from life.
Yeah, I have an interesting story. Dr. Barbara Fredrickson did decades of research on mindfulness and connecting with people. And she said that she made a grave mistake the first few years of her marriage, because her husband would call her at the office on lunchtime just to see how she was doing and how her day was going. And she would say to him, I have just spent 13 minutes on the phone with you. Now I'm behind on work. So she calculated the exact minutes of the call. And
Whoa.
she later went on to say, I missed a chance of having a really deep moment of connection with my husband. And it took years of research to realize, wow, I was approaching it wrong.
Wow, that's brutal. 13 minutes. Yeah, no, but she acknowledged it and she talked about it. And that's almost it. You have to call a timeout because we're all rushing around and we all have schedules. And people can't just be afterthoughts if we're going to have the kind of healthy connection to others.
Absolutely.
And part of this society also, we've talked about this so many times, you more than I, you're the guru in this, and this is all about being mindful, being present, being in the moment. And this is very similar to what we just talked about, but Barbara was not in the moment. She was thinking about all the things that she wanted to do or had to do and how he interrupted it.
Yes. And so mindfulness, as we discussed, is always key.
Yeah, being there, wherever you are, be there. Whoever you're talking to, be there. And it's hard for us today because of the pace we live. But even as we speak to someone, we're thinking about what we're going to say next, not really listening to what they're saying. And the next one is about how we approach life. As a self-centered approach to life, like we're the center of the universe and everyone else is out there. And when you attempt to have a conversation or interact with someone, that doesn't lend itself to being a very fruitful communication. If it's not so much you feel better than them, but you're more focused on you. You're the important thing, and you may be thinking about what you're going to say to them. You may be thinking about other things, like even how you look, right?
Yeah. So they're listening to respond versus listening to understand. And very often, and this is not to say that people are being self-absorbed, because we all have our insecurities. But when it comes to connection and getting past what I would say would be a little social anxiety, people are concerned when they're talking about how they look, the impressions they're making on other people. Are they saying the right thing? And they miss that moment of connection where, if we're other-centered, not only does it take the pressure off of how you are being and you focus on the other person, but it just makes communication so much better.
So we're all dealing with this. This is how we live today. And that's difficult, but just being aware of the fact that because we live in today's society, that we're kind of wired to not have significant interpersonal relationships and periods of communicating with someone. So just being aware of that so that we pay attention to it and that we are there in the moment, that we take time to listen more than respond. I like that. Listening to understand.
Before we move on, I'm just curious your opinion, Dr. Roger. How do you think COVID and being isolated and micro moments of just on social media all the time making comments, do you think that's helping our communication or hindering our communication skills?
Well, that's an interesting question. I hadn't thought much about it, but I think it's a two-pronged answer. And one is that I think we have, and I experienced this one time when I was in the military and I was away from the family, and that you crave communication. You crave being with others. I think we've all begun to realize how much we need other people. Yet we haven't been meeting face to face for a long time, and you can lose the skills. And we see that in our children today. We worry about our young people and whether technology is getting in the way of significant and substantive interpersonal skills, and we worry about that. So I think in one way it made us realize the importance of it, and another way maybe it made us a little sloppy about being face to face with someone.
Yeah, it's kind of relearning our skills.
Yeah. But that time when I was away from my family, I think I mentioned it in a podcast many months ago, but I found myself when I would go out to a restaurant, a server would come and I want to hear their life story. They would do that, but I'd ask them questions, and they were always polite, and everything that answered. But I was craving that connection.
Yeah.
So, an important part of any kind of communication, and we have talked about this very in depth fairly recently, and that about emotional intelligence, and that's about realizing what's going on in yourself, in your body. How are you feeling? What are your emotions? But it is also about being able to detect and then manage. I don't mean in a controlling sort of way, but to understand how someone else may be feeling, what is their emotional state, and having some empathy regarding that. I think this goes along with not being the center of the universe, so to speak, and being connected and aware of others. This is a social responsibility that we have. I've been, I take the great courses. They're the best courses in the country. And I'm doing one, and I was doing it this morning as I was exercising, and on the Stoics. And the Stoics, they were ancient Greeks and Romans, but their whole idea was that to live a good life, to be a good human, using your reason to be a good human. And part of that was the fact that you were part of the human race. You were part of a larger community, and you had social responsibility, and that was a good life for them. And I'm not so sure that's where we are today. I mean, I think we want to be good humans, but I think many of us can forget about or at least not prioritize how others might feel, how that might affect a larger number of people or the situation, that sort of thing. So I think it's awareness and empathy, and as well as these interpersonal skills.
Yeah. And you've identified three really important components of emotional intelligence: the interpersonal, the empathy, and the social responsibility. And maybe we could break those down for people in kind of simple terms, because these are the nuts and bolts of how to communicate better.
All right, let's tell them. You tell them. Let's hear because I know you're excellent at this. How do you see interpersonal skills? What are they? What do they really mean?
So I would say that I've gotten a lot better. And this is when I talk about forced growth. I wasn't naturally good at this. Nobody's naturally good at communicating. We all have to work at it. But the basic components of interpersonal skills would be being a trustworthy, reliable, responsible person, being able to collaborate in a group, like teamwork in sports, at an event, or on a job. So the lone wolf scenario does not apply here. It includes give and take in relationships, but that give and take, while it doesn't have to be one for one, it can't be all one-sided, or one person is going to get shortchanged in that relationship if one's always giving and the other is always taking. And that involves emotional support. And those with high interpersonal skills know how to make and build connections, and they can become comfortable in situations that maybe they're not naturally comfortable in. So that could be even, for example, going to a large event is not something that's normally comfortable for me. I like smaller, intimate settings, but I can learn to adapt to those situations and develop a certain level of comfort when I need to be there.
So it takes work. You describe awareness and practice. And so you can get in a situation, we've all been in uncomfortable situations, right? Yes. And as we talk about working at it, and thinking about it. So if something is happening fairly frequently, and these are times when we're at a loss, or maybe the interaction was not ideal because this particular scenario happened again and you weren't prepared. So yeah. I think you told me a story about this, didn't you?
I've had this happen a few times. So one of the ways we build these skills is to understand our environment and start to pick up on verbal and nonverbal skills and learning how to change the flow of a conversation. And sometimes it involves practice, which I learned the hard way. Years ago, I ran into a woman who I had worked with some 7 years prior, and she had lost maybe 40 pounds. She had grown her hair out. She looked completely different. And she came up and said hi to me in the store. And for the life of me, I could not remember who she was. She's like, "Hi, Danielle." And I'm looking at her and I'm going through all the things in my brain, kind of going through the file system, like, okay, did I teach her yoga? Because I taught hundreds of people at that time. Was it somebody from work? Was it a contract? Like, I just couldn't place it. Now, I could have simply asked, "Hey, when's the last time we saw each other?" I could have opened up with a question to be like, "Wow, it's been a while." I could have admitted and said, I'm sorry. I just can't seem to place where I know you from. So I stood there awkwardly. She stood there awkwardly. Finally, she told me her first name. That did not help because now I'm going through the list of all the people I know with that name. And finally, she said, "It's so-and-so from this location." I was like, "Oh, we worked on a project together." And then the light bulb went off. And of course, we both felt highly embarrassed.
Yeah.
In that, she could have given me a little more. I could have asked for a little more. And even just admitting, for some reason, your face is familiar. Why am I? And then I could have said, "Hey, you look great. I didn't, outside the stress of work, I didn't recognize you," or made a joke.
Yeah. So with that happening, right, you just gave some nice tips or you can just admit it. And because I think that happens to everyone and some people can be offended, but hopefully they wouldn't. But I was thinking, let's see, when's the last time we saw each other? That might, things like that, so we can learn from uncomfortable situations so that we can get better at it. I mean, I think that's what life is all about.
And, it sounds silly, but some of the exercises you can do on your own is if you know people in a work environment or people from the gym or some other social environment. Imagine you ran into them in a completely different situation, say the movie theater. My husband and I were in Sedona and we met people there who happened to be from Tampa, an hour away from us. 3 years later, we're at a concert in Tampa and the couple walked by and we both looked at each other and pointed at the same time like, "Hey, we know you guys." So it's not unreasonable that you're going to run into people outside of the context in which you know them. So you can kind of have in your back pocket a couple of things. Roger, you gave a really great example. "Hey, where do we know? When's the last time we saw each other?" Or, "What movie are you seeing?" Or just some general things like, "How's your family?" Just have a couple of ideas. And if you practice those scenarios, it actually becomes more natural when you do encounter people.
And then if all else fails, you could just say, "I am so sorry. You're familiar, but I can't place where, so."
It would just be terrible if it were your boss. Like, "Doc Roger,
Oh, yeah.
I'm pretty sure if I ran into you in the grocery store and I'm like, the face is familiar."
Well, it is. We are wired as humans. Language and numbers and things like that were something that we learned along the way. What we know and what we're best at is basis. And that's and not only faces, but what a place looks like. I mean, again, we're wired from our ancient times. This is where we're particularly good. And now we're using words and numbers and whatever else, so we have to incorporate that into it also. So, let's face it, when interpersonal skills, they require practicing certain skills, but really when it comes down to it, I think a key component we've already talked about is that other person. What are they feeling, and to be concerned and aware and attentive to, even at the moment when we meet them, what might be going on. They could have just broken something in their store, say, or something like that, so that you can take into consideration the moment here and what they might be feeling.
I think what you're talking about here is empathy and taking on another person's perspective. And that's a little different from sympathy. Both are valid skills to have. But sympathy is feeling sorry for someone. I'm sorry this happened to you.
Whereas empathy is much more being, as you said, in the moment, taking on that perspective and feeling with the person. And usually an empathic statement begins with you instead of I or me. So it could be you must be feeling very scared right now. You sound sad. Are you? That's different from I feel bad for you, which is a little more of a sympathetic. Again, not wrong, but when we want to develop empathy and being other-centered, that's the one we're working with here. And I can give you an example. Your partner walks into the house and says, I just got laid off from my job. I got a parking ticket and I think I'm coming down with a cold. If you're practicing empathy, do you say, I'm sorry to hear that? That's not wrong, but that's not empathetic. Or do you say, you seem really down right now. Would you like to talk about it? Or you must be feeling really upset. Would you like me to make you some soup? It might help you feel a little better. So the big key is asking excavating questions, trying to dig in. What do you think? How do you feel? What were you hoping would happen? And these are very similar to coaching questions, just asking to understand.
And we're kind of wired to do this. So we just found out, since we've had brain scans, about these things called mirror neurons. Mainly, they are when we can see that when someone is undergoing something, say it is a negative event, and someone else is with them, and we both have that, we're doing brain scans on both of them, that the where the neurons are firing in their brain is the same place. So basically what this is we feel to some extent what others are feeling, particularly in very negative situations. So empathy is something we still have to work on and be attentive to, but in many ways we're kind of wired to do it. I mean, if you see someone crying, even if you don't even know them, we all feel, most of us feel something. We feel sad, we feel caring, we want to help, and humans are really wired that way, although sometimes we hear stories where we don't think so, but we really are.
Yeah. And the last one, and I know, Roger, you talk about this in Live Long, Die Short, social responsibility.
Yes, interpersonal communication, certainly we've been talking about a one-on-one, but we can think about it in terms of the race. Like I was saying, the Stoics did. The important part was that you act like a responsible person in the context of the human race, namely that you're a member of it and you want to help it. Your action should not hurt others or the group that you're in, or maybe the race. That's a little grandiose, but certainly the group we're in or the situation. So having the sense that what you do and what you say should be a benefit to, again, not only the individual, but to the greater good, that and it contributes to the greater good of whatever group or a situation that you're in. And that's where things like certainly volunteerism and having a sense of purpose, but that purpose is not only about you. It is important, your purpose, but also a purpose that, again, enhances is for the benefit of the greater good, enhances the group you're with or the situation that you're in. And that is really a core of interpersonal skills, for sure.
And it can be small, right? So if it's somebody who has significant health challenges and they're like, well, I can't volunteer or commit to a certain amount of time, but random acts of kindness, simple little things, even asking yourself in the morning when you go outside, how can I make everyone's day a little better? Everyone I meet, how can I brighten their day? Whether it's a smile, whatever it is.
Exactly. And that's self-serving. You're going to feel better when you do that. You really will. You may initially say, I don't want to do that. I'll feel like a sucker. No, you will feel better. We are wired to do that. And that's what we're talking about.
And anyone that I've spoken with through coaching who finds that purpose, it's the key out of a lot of stress. And if they're prone to depression, just focusing on helping somebody else. Not, as you said, it makes you feel better, feeling as if you're doing something worthwhile. You have a place in the world.
Sure. When you open a door for someone and they acknowledge it, they feel good about that. What does they say? Passing it on, sort of that sort of thing. Someone in a drive-through pays for the person behind them, and what they find is when that happens, that person pays for the one behind them, and it's no, it is something that we honestly do feel better, but we have to take the time, and we have to know how to do it. So, I think people who've read the Bible and Revelations, they've heard about something called, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. But basically, and that was a painting that someone did in late 19th century, Victor Vasnitsin. But this was about the things that would cause the end of time, the apocalypse. And the four horsemen are supposed to represent death and famine and war and conquest. But Dr. Gottman at the University of Washington has brought a whole new take relative to interpersonal skills, hasn't he?
So Dr. Gottman and his wife run an institute where they can tell with 93.6% accuracy if the couples coming to see them are going to stay together or get divorced, based on his version of the four horsemen. So I think it would be really great if we broke these down a little. Maybe we can go through what they are and how to remedy them. Does that sound okay to you?
Yeah, and I think it's good too. Even for someone who's not married, they focus on marriages, but this is for interpersonal skills with anyone really that you want to have substantive connection to. So they start with criticism. In what context? What does it mean in this context, Danielle?
Criticism is exactly as you think it would be. Somebody shows up late for dinner because they got stuck in traffic or late for work. And the other person might say, "Oh, you're always late and you didn't bother to call me. I was worried about you. Why do you always do this to me?" Just basically the nitpicking, the you. That's a big one, criticism.
Yeah, it sure is. How we would respond. And probably how we would respond to that would be the next one, defensiveness, right?
Yeah, becoming the victim, saying, "Well, I couldn't help that I was stuck in traffic. I didn't have a signal. I didn't know I was going to get stuck at work." Just like I have to defend. I feel like someone's attacking me and I need to defend myself.
Yeah, it's a normal human reaction. And the next one is stonewalling, which is basically, related to the others. It's, and as a guy, I particularly or maybe tend to go this way in certain situations. And that's about withdrawing, in order to avoid an argument.
Yeah.
So if there's consistent criticism, that can lead to defensiveness, but it also can lead to this stonewalling.
Yes. And there's two parts to stonewalling. There's chronic stonewalling. We never talk about the bad stuff. We just know, not doing it. It's like talking to a wall. And then there's the stonewalling, which we'll talk a little more about, where somebody is just flooded with those fear response that we talked about, where they can't talk because they're in such a state. And so we can talk a little bit about how to remedy that in just a moment. But stonewalling is when things begin to escalate, and it's pretty bad. But the worst.
Yeah, the worst one. And this is when the knives come out, the gloves come off, and that's contempt, and that is sarcasm. It's calling names. You're an idiot, things like this. You don't know how to do anything. You've never been able to,
right.
Things. And this is tough.
It goes from the criticism of like, "Oh, you never call me, when you're going to be late, and that was an inconvenience," to "You're an irresponsible, horrible person." It's just that level of disgust.
Even I could probably predict that a couple won't stay together if they're doing this one regularly.
Yes.
So this is tough. So what, how might we've described it, what kind of remedy might there be? Because we all fall into these traps of doing this.
Yeah. So for criticism, some of it is talking about feelings. For example, the person arriving late without calling. I was legitimately worried about you, so I was feeling very, very upset that something happened. I would really appreciate a phone call in the future if you can, or something, and you're putting it in a positive spin, like, I'm concerned about you. It's not that dinner's getting cold. It might be that dinner's getting cold on the table, but more than likely it's, I feel that as if I'm not being respected in some way. So putting the positive spin can let them know how you're feeling versus you, and putting it in kind of condemnation.
It makes sense. It absolutely does make sense. How about defensiveness? What would you recommend there?
Now that's the receiving person, say the person who is late, for example, saying, I'm really sorry. I was stuck in traffic and I, next time I will make sure that I send you a text before I get on the road if I think I'm going to be late, getting home. And I'm sorry I worried you. Apologize if needed. And realize that it's not meant to be a personal attack. In a really loving relationship, it's not meant to be an attack. So not getting defensive and just taking a step back and practicing empathy and understanding, okay, I understand why the other person is feeling upset.
Yeah. Again, that makes sense. So stonewalling, since I'm the guy, I probably should take a stab at this one. This is, there is a moment when it can get heated in things, like with even contempt or criticism, where you do want to take a step back, step away for a minute, but not as a strategy for long periods of time. Like if it's getting heated, walking away or withdrawing for a few moments and taking a break, that makes sense. But when it becomes a regular strategy that you're withdrawing from any sort of interaction that's there because you're afraid that it will go into an argument or that sort of thing, that once again, that I think it's pretty intuitive that that's not going to lead to substantive interpersonal communication if you're just basically not communicating at all. You're not dealing with whatever is the barrier to a good interaction. And you got anything to add to that, Danielle?
Yeah, well, this one's a really tricky one. When I've spoken with couples, there's usually the one person, and I tend to be this person, that when there's a conflict, I want to talk about it and resolve it now. I don't want us to be angry. I want us to be in love and happy. So we must discuss it now. But a lot of times the other person might need, if they're flooded with that fear response, they're feeling criticized, they're feeling defensive, they might need 20 minutes to walk away, or else they're going to say something unkind. And they know this about themselves. So they need time, about 20 minutes to decompress and come back. So just recognizing that people's timing for having these discussions need to be taken into account. And when people are withdrawing constantly, that's a good time to possibly either seek support or practice some of those interpersonal skills and agree. We're going to talk about these things, but we're going to try to do it in a way that's not attacking, that's coming from a place of love.
You're talking like someone who is a counselor, someone who's a coach.
It could be a coach. It could be it could be a therapist. It could be a minister. If in your faith you have somebody that you feel comfortable talking to, and some of it is just practicing. You almost have to have rules for engagement. And if you find that you're being overly critical of one another or getting overly defensive, maybe coming up with practicing, instead of saying, you always say, I'm feeling this, and this is a response to this particular action, and separating the person's character from the action. And it takes practice. For some, for some, it might be more natural, and for some, it's going to take a little more work than for others.
Yeah, and this is emotional intelligence. Once again, you got emotions going on inside of you. There are emotions in the person you're interacting with, and how to manage those is critical. But this one, the contempt one, there was a book many years ago when I was starting out. It was called The 1 Minute Manager, and basically is how do you manage someone who's not really doing the job, or in some way isn't measuring up. And it was starting with some praise, so that it wasn't what you said wasn't viewed as all negative, and in this case, all contemptuous. So perhaps saying, instead of saying you're an idiot, to say, when you remember things, it is so, I appreciate it so very much, and so maybe we can talk about why sometimes you don't do those things, or that sort of thing. So it's not a question that you're a scumbag and pond scum. You are a good person, basically. And let's talk about how we can sort of have more of that than the things that make me angry.
Yeah. And with contempt, before it gets to that point, a really good exercise is going to lead us to probably our biggest takeaway from this podcast episode. If we start to notice their qualities and tell them regularly, I've gotten in the habit, my husband might make coffee every day. He might empty the dishwasher, take the dog out every day. And every day I say, hey, thank you for taking the dog out. Thank you for taking the trash out. He says, thank you for making dinner. We never take for granted what the other person is doing, because you never want to get to the point like, wow, they don't even notice anymore. So the reason I'm bringing that up is Gottman's golden rule. And you hear this a lot in workplace environments, but it applies to relationships. Because of our negativity bias, we need about 5 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction. And those interactions could be a hug, a smile. So I really think it's important for people to take notice of their current interactions and see where they stand. And some exercises might include, at the end of the day, telling your partner a few things that they've done for you and verbally expressing gratitude. In our house, we tend to do it throughout the day, but however it works, but really take stock, because some people might be surprised at how much negativity is there that they don't even realize.
Yeah. That's true. The golden rule, that's something to live by. Well, and Dr. Gottman and his wife have given us so much good advice here, but there's a best remedy, isn't there?
Yeah, this one I keep in mind all the time in all of interactions. So in terms of connection, turning toward someone is the best remedy toward repairing any relationship that could be going awry. And he describes it as making a bid. Now, what do I mean by that? Making a bid for connection might be, if you're in the middle of a fight, reaching out to give your partner a hug. If they hug you back, they've accepted the bid. You both want to connect. Versus if they flick your arm away, like, don't hug me. Or if you ask your partner, how was your day? And maybe you've had kind of a tense relationship lately. If they say, I'm fine, well, they didn't accept the bid toward connection. But if they say, my day was okay, how was your day? They accepted the bid. Because the key indicator of whether a relationship can make it or not is, are both partners willing to move toward each other and try to connect?
Profound, I think. Simple and yet profound. Well, thank you, Danielle. Thank you for this time. Thank you for all. As always, I've learned from this. Here we are. We want to be better people. That's what it's all about, people, who listen to us, about being healthy, having a healthy longevity, and enjoying this ride.
You've been listening to Dr. Roger and Friends, The Bright Side of Longevity. If you like the show, please rate and review, and be sure to click to follow.